Yeah, it's okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the November meeting of the Audit Committee here in County Hall in Beverley. Before we begin, could I please ask that everyone switches off mobile phones or puts them on silent? And if the fire alarm goes, which we don't expect it to do, the exit doors are on your right, and the officers will direct you on the route. With me today, I have a new Vice Chair, Councillor Holtby, so welcome to him. And officers joining us today, we have Darren Stevens, Gillian Nielsen, Benita Boys, sorry, Mark Button, Sarah Lockerbie, and Mike Salter. And Andy, sorry, Andy, I'm still there at the end, Andy Hardy. And also joining us today from our external auditors, Mazars, is Mark Outerside. Welcome, Mark. So without any further ado, we will move on and ask for any declarations of pecuniary, non-pecuniary or prejudicial interest. Does anyone have anything? Councillor Redshaw.
Just that my wife is a member of the East Riding Pension Fund.
Councillor Whittaker.
It's a non-pecuniary. I just always do it. I work for the NHS, so I do need to mention that when we're talking about.
Thank you. To item 2 in the agenda, to approve the minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held in July, 24th of July. Is there someone to propose approval? Councillor Redjohn, Councillor Bibb seconding. Thank you. We'll note those minutes as approved. And item 3 on the agenda is the East Riding Pension Fund Audit Completion Report for the year to 31st March 25. And Mark will take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's on. Yep. Yeah, as you say, we've got 2 reports for your consideration this morning. The first one being the audit completion report for the pension fund and a progress report for the council. I'll take both reports as read and highlight the key areas for you this morning. The audit completion report for the pension fund summarises the findings for our audit, noting that there is not the final signed version and we issue that separately. Section 1 provides an executive summary. I'd like to draw your attention to a significant matter we discussed with management, and this was a challenge in obtaining sufficient audit evidence for 2 level 3 investments. This has led to a write-down in the asset value and is reported as an error in Section 5 of our report. We also intend to request specific representations, easy for me to say, in your management letter, confirming that there's no issue and it is isolated to one fund manager and is not pervasive across the portfolio. In connection with this, we've also experienced difficulties in obtaining confirmations from other fund managers for other level 3 investments. And this isn't uncommon across all our audits. But this has impacted on our audit delivery timeline and is reflected in Section 3 of this report. Section 3 outlines the outstanding areas of work at the time of drafting the report. I can confirm that the audit team has made good progress on most of the items, including the completion of the work on level 2 investments with no significant issues to report. We will provide a further update in our follow-up completion letter. Section 4 updates you on the significant and enhanced risks identified at our audit planning stage. We're not yet in a position to conclude on those risks pertaining to the issues outstanding, particularly regarding the level 3 investments. And again, we'll provide an update to this in our follow-up letter. Section 5 summarises misstatements identified to date. As mentioned, there is one correction for the £35 million for the investment that we couldn't corroborate. Any further errors will be reported in our follow-up letter. The appendices include our internal control conclusions. There's no major issues identified in the current years, and those noted are follow-ups on previously raised recommendations. Finally, we've included our draft audit report and management letter, which will be updated upon completion of the audit. Happy to take any questions on that one.
Thank you, Mark. Do you have any questions? Councillor Redshaw.
Yes, thank you. Couple of questions. First of all, regards the significant risks on page 18 of the report. Clearly works are ongoing on the two items, both management override of controls and the valuation of level 3 investments. I mean, there's no big concerns there, but what work is being done or is deemed necessary to mitigate the potential fraud risk to management override? And likewise, in valuation of level 3 investments, you know, what work is ongoing and how is that likely to conclude?
So
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not very good with the technology. So in terms of the level 3 investments, we are just waiting for confirmation and information to corroborate those valuations to come back. It is just a waiting game at the moment and trying to get that information as soon as we possibly can. But at this stage, there's no concerns in that regard. And in terms of management override of controls, this is where we look at things like unusual transactions, of which we haven't really identified any. When we look at journals and postings within the unusual postings, and again, that work's underway, but there's nothing to report at this stage.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's potential fraud rather than actual, but it's a matter of closing the loops and seeing, you know, making sure it is seen to be done. The other question I had was regards the adjusted misstatements that you referred to. I appreciate it's an accounting adjustment of 34 million. It's been written down to 0, but so can you explain a bit further about that and the fact that is likely to be recoverable?
That will feature as part of the management representations we're going to ask to be put into the management rep letter. So our discussions with officers is that it isn't an issue, and it is, I guess it's belt and braces, that we've not had the information to be able to say that it is valued at 35 million. Therefore, it's been written down to 0 at this stage. But there's no risk in terms of it not being there. But we just don't have enough assurance to pin a value to it for the purposes of the financial statements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions on the pension? No. Okay, we are asked to note the report, please. And we can move on to agenda item number 4, which is the audit report, the external audit report for the council. And again, we'll just continue with Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you say, this is our second report, and this is an update on the council's audit, which is currently underway. Again, we'll take the report as read and highlight the key messages for you. Our risk assessment for 24-25 remains unchanged as that we outlined in our audit plan. The draft financial statements have been received as of the 8th of August, which was just after the SIPFA publication date of the 30th of June. Based on the draft accounts, we have updated our materiality thresholds. So overall materiality is now set at 22.7 million, with performance materiality at 18.2. And we intend to report any individual errors exceeding £682,000 to this committee when we present our findings early in the new year. To date, we've not highlighted any significant issues in regard to the financial statements work that we're doing. In terms of value for money, we've provided an update, and here we've flagged a potential weakness in arrangements, and this is around the dedicated schools grant. This is something that's happening nationally. Lots of councils are in the same position in that the DSG deficits are growing, and we're just, again, belt and braces, making sure that we highlight this to those charged with governance when there's a potential risk around the deficit and the plans to reduce it. But at this stage, we're not saying it is a significant weakness. We're saying it's a risk of significant weakness, and our internal moderation procedures will go through those to see if it actually is a weakness. We're just highlighting it at this stage. And we've also been made aware of a recent CQC inspection report, so I'm bringing that to your attention today. It's not in our progress report. It's quite a live issue. And again, we're considering how we'll report that in our value for money findings. I don't propose to say much more on that other than the audit is progressing and we've got no major issues to report in terms of the financial statements. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any questions on council report?
To be honest, it's on page 70 of the internal audit. If that is, sorry, I'm really sorry. I may be jumping ahead.
If it's
My
okay,
computer broke this morning. It's gone to IT, so all of my report and everything, I've had to print out my questions, and I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
If it's okay with you, councillor Whitaker,
Yeah, when we move on, yeah.
move on to the internal audit, and will it do just to wait till questions on that section? Super. Councillor Edge.
Yeah, it was again just in the audit progress, again, identified risks, and as regards statutory override, there's clearly some risk there. And I was wondering, well, we're looking at potentially at the most recent medium-term financial plan projects the high needs deficit for 27-28 to be 83 million. I mean, that is a big threat. Yeah, it doesn't need to be said to council finances. I mean, is there any further updates as to where we are? You know, because
Thank you for the question, Councillor Redshaw, and it is a significant risk for local authorities across the country. This many are carrying a significant high needs deficit, and some councils much higher than we are at the moment. They really are eye-watering figures. We were hoping for a planned policy announcement from the government before Christmas, and specifically this month with a white paper to follow. That's been pushed out to the new year now, so it is a difficult issue for national government to tackle. But local government is very keen on an answer as soon as possible and to the way forward with this, because what it essentially is a shortfall in funding from the Department for Education for provision of services to children with special educational needs and disabilities. It is a ring-fence funding arrangement. It's funding that goes to schools, and that shortfall in the cash position is being underwritten by the council at the moment, and the regulations in place mean we don't have to charge it to our budgets, but ultimately we need to find a solution because it's becoming very much unsustainable across local government.
is there any acknowledgement from government, because clearly we're the worst funded council in the country in this respect, and the officers and council leaders have challenged the government in terms of what funding is provided, but we don't seem to be getting anything back unless is there any acknowledgement at all of our special financial position, given the nature of the kind of rural aspects of our authority?
I'm not aware of anything specifically around the East Riding, but there is acknowledgement by the government that this is a huge challenge, the shortfall in the funding system nationally, and this is what the white paper is intended to tackle.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
Can I just ask?
Sir Holden.
It's not a question. It's just like on page 53. There's at the bottom of it. It says clearly trivial What does that really mean? I mean, it seems a lot of money to be trivial with.
It does, and I wish I was a penny behind it, but the reality of it is we cannot audit to the penny, so we have to set a threshold, and it's common. It's a common approach for audit firms to set a materiality level based on the key drivers for the organisation. So we set a headline materiality, so that's the top number, and from there we set a performance materiality, which is basically what any balance in your accounts. Did I say 17 million? I should know it. And we test any balance in your accounts at or above that number. And then the triviality number is we cannot chase every single penny in your accounts. So it's our judgment that that is a reasonable value for us to report or us to you as those charged with governance. And that is a percentage of the headline materiality. I think it's 2%. But it'd be a very expensive audit if we audited to the penny, and I don't think we'd ever finish. So that's the rationale for it.
Okay. Is there anything else for Mark before we note the content of the report? No? Okay then, the committee is asked to note the content of the external audit progress report for the council, duly noted. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the internal audit report, and that's from Benita.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. We've got period 2 progress update report. So this covers July to October 25. And the report that you have just covers those areas. So we've highlighted in the at a glance page the key headlines, but at the end of the report, you've got a list of everything we've completed. And in that list, in Appendix 1, this also highlights the work that's in progress that you will get at the next meeting. So there's quite a lot we've done. We've done 17 pieces in this reporting period. 5 of those are assurance reviews, quite a number of advisory pieces, which includes data analytics and actually includes a piece of work on high needs that I've referenced specifically, and 2 grant certifications. So a range there. The overall opinion of the 5 assurance pieces is overall reasonable. So there are no limited assurance opinions to report this period rather. Excuse me. So in terms of those key headlines, just want to draw your attention in the report to areas that I've provided further information on in terms of emphasis. So if we move to page 71, at the bottom of that page, I've identified significant issues. So 3 of those significant issues are in relation to follow-up that we've undertaken on previous limited assurance reviews that have been received by this committee for 24-25. Those were deputyships, capital schemes targeted review, and public health, procurement commissioning, and financial governance. I'll come on to those in a bit more detail because they are expanded on further into the report. But before I do that, I just want to highlight the next paragraph is really just to flag a piece of advisory work that we've done on the high needs budget and the deficit recovery plan. We've done this position statement to understand where the council is at the moment and look at some benchmarking information and do some data analytics. And we've provided that to officers, and following this position statement, we will be doing an assurance piece. So that will come in subsequent periods. Just moving on then through the report, the next page highlights, as I'm required to report to you under internal audit standards, any significant changes to the agreed programme of work that agreed, as in the Audit Committee have agreed, that we brought to you earlier in the year. It would have been March. So we've undertaken a piece of advisory work on the coroner's service, which was requested. And in addition, we've also done a gap analysis in light of the council's position against the requirements of the new Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. So just to flag those. So if I move down to page 74, this is where I've just provided a little bit more information on the follow-up work that we've been doing on the previous limited assurance reviews. So if I just take them each in turn, deputyships, members of this committee have heard on a number of occasions from the relevant officers around progress. And we're doing follow-up pieces. We've done a couple now. We're going to be entering another formal follow-up review in November. But what I've highlighted here are just the progress positions that we've gathered from officers around the 2 priority 1 actions that were in the report. So one was on the implementation of a case management system, and one was on workload management. So I won't go into the detail unless you've got any specific questions, but we're staying very close to this area and we're tracking this. And at some point in the future, we hope to be able to close these actions. But until they're completed, and certainly until the priority 1s are completed, they remain open and visible to this committee. The second, if you move on to page 75, the second area of limited assurance from last year was a targeted review of 4 capital schemes, and we had quite a discussion around this. This was a focused review. We focused on 4 particular schemes that carried particular financial and scheme challenges, and we were directed to these areas by officers. So this was intentionally focused, and we gave it limited assurance, and we followed up the actions. We've had an update, but some of these actions, many of them are still in progress, and some of them are structural in terms of the governance arrangements and the embedding of any improvements to the past around business cases, budgetary issues, etc., and the working arrangements between staff in particular areas. So we've identified all of those in the report. Officers have signed up to them. There is progress, but again, we cannot yet close off these items. But at the meeting where we discussed this, and obviously as part of discussions with officers, we agreed to do a further review, because I think there was concerns as to do these 4 schemes represent, schemes across the capital programme. So we've undertaken a subsequent review on further 7 schemes. Now, I know it doesn't sound a lot, but it does take quite a long time to go through the schemes, and all the schemes are different, as you can imagine. So we've taken 7 schemes. We've given the review that we've done, the recent review, reasonable assurance, but we're still identifying areas around budget and scope creep. And so one of the recommendations that we've made as part of that review is for these issues, certainly in the significant ones where there are significant changes from in terms of budget and scope from initial inception and business case through to the actual finished item. We are wanting to see, not necessarily in all cases, but some focused post-implementation review so that we can feed that learning back into the process. So I think this audit committee needs to note that review. Obviously, we've only looked at 7 schemes. They can't necessarily be extrapolated across the whole population, but we have selected the schemes across different types and across different sort of functional areas. So we feel that we've got a bit of a sense, and we're not, the schemes that we've looked at, there is documentation around the business cases, around the project highlight reports, all of that is there. The issue that we're raising about the budget and the scope creep is the actual outcome of that process. And that, a lot of these schemes, for a number of different reasons, because they extend over a number of years, in many cases have actually needed to be changed in terms of the scope details and the budget forecasts. The third area that we gave limited assurance on last year is on public health, procurement, commissioning and financial governance. Now, we have had discussions with the officers around their progress. We're not able to bring a lot of detail back to you on this because work is in progress around looking at the structure and looking at associated procedures and the procurement frameworks. So I do expect that if we haven't got anything firmer to give you at the next meeting, that the officers maybe should provide a position statement to the audit committee. So I think we just have to see what we get over the next few months. Okay. A lot of these actions are not short-term actions. They do take some time to work through, but given that they're limited assurance opinions that we have provided, obviously we want to get them followed up and closed off as soon as possible. I'm going to end there, Chair. I mean, the rest of the report follows the usual format, information really, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Benita. Questions for Benita? Councillor.
Well, that's the question I actually had. Now I've got it there. Sorry, now I've got the report. I can actually get where I wanted to. So I've working for the NHS. I have got a little bit of obsession with at the moment AI and our data collection and data use. So obviously you mentioned on page 70, and I know we also mentioned within the health stuff, and you mentioned all the other ones about working on an AI policy and governance. But I think there's a cost associated with that, and there does need to be timetables that exist to create that framework. But I also want to ensure that ethical compliance before departments begin using it. It is a money-saving great thing. AI is fantastic. We can all use it, but I need to make sure that that is put into place, and I need to know what we're doing to make sure that there are those ethical considerations being put into place as well.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of our involvement in this, we've got an audit current, and we're sort of almost at draft stage on AI governance in the council. So, and part of that is about optimization, but the other side to that obviously is about the necessary control. So internal audit also sits on the council's information governance management board. So they consider all of these aspects, and they're considering the policy, and they're looking at AI. So I think in terms of our report, we are sort of happy to report that the council has a policy, but we need to expand our reach in terms of that assurance. So at the minute, our review has looked at the policy arrangements and about, and we haven't finished it yet, so I can't bring the details to you, but we can discuss the details at a subsequent meeting. So I think in terms of AI, yes, the point you make is a valid one, and we need to be looking at AI to actually make a lot of transformation and efficiencies in the council. So it runs through a lot of other pieces of work that we're involved in as well. So as a piece on its own, we're looking at the policy framework and the governance arrangements around that, and we'll be making some recommendations. But no, I don't believe that all councils have an AI policy, so I think that's a good step.
Okay. I believe that Darren Stevens would.
Yeah, Benita may have covered it. I was just going to say that one of the things we did quite early on, actually, relative to a lot of other councils, was put in place that policy that I think you were just talking about, Benita, around governance and the ethical considerations around the use of AI. So not so much about how we're going to deploy it, although there's a lot of work going on around that. So that went, I haven't got the date right in front of me because I didn't know you were going to ask about it there, but and that was, I think it went to scrutiny as well, because it's a very interesting area, because there's two things, aren't there? One is about exploiting AI and getting the benefits from it, and one is about all those ethical and governance issues. One of the things that I recall being in there is around, for example, when AI is used by, say, a report author, to what extent you acknowledge in the report that AI has been used in the development and construction of that report. And these will be issues, the sort of issues that a lot of organisations will wrestle with over the coming coming. So it's worth digging that out because we were quite early in doing that kind of governance, ethical thinking.
I mean, that's brilliant to hear, but I also want to, we need to consider when we're, and I guess I'm thinking just from the health perspective, but actually for all of our external partners, how that crossover looks, because we've got an AI policy. I know that the NHS have just developed an AI policy, but do they correspond together? And are we making sure that there is actually that joint thinking, because that's where that exploitation could come in, and actually the reputation of us as council could.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you. It was just in relation to the CQC report that was mentioned earlier. How will internal audit be involved in responding to the CQC report on adult social care? And if you like, what is the plan for audit going forward on this? So
we'll support the council as is required, and we're just waiting really to understand where we sit, because obviously there's a lot of players in this space. We will continue to do our internal audit assurance activity that is directly involved in adult social care, but also corporately. So when we do a corporate review, we will include samples from across adult social care and those more generic areas such as payroll, creditors, debtors, those sorts of things. But the sorts of work that we're doing at the moment and that we have done are on payment pathways for charging for adult social care. We're currently involved in transformation stream on that very issue. And we're doing a piece of work on direct payments, and there are other pieces in the plan that will link into certain elements of the service that may or may not have been the focus of, CQC commentary. If we step aside from that, we've just completed a piece of work on savings assurance. Again, that has an adults link to it. So it's quite, in terms of internal audit activity, we will continue with our plan. And if we go back to the plan that we agreed in March, there are lots of links. But in terms of the CQC inspection itself and the action plan, we can support in a number of ways. And I think it's whether we provide focused assurance, whether we help provide support on triangulating the actions. We just have to wait and see. So I think if I can just say that I will try and provide some further information to the next meeting, because I should have it by then. Is that okay? Thank you.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holby.
Yeah, thanks very much, Benita, for that. I'm just going back to 75, where it's the capital schemes. This is a slightly worrying area, isn't it? Because you mentioned there are 4 schemes you looked into, and there must be many capital schemes. I just wonder whether you can, it's silent on which ones they are, and there may be a reason for that. I just wonder if you could tell me what they were and give us an example of how much percentage-wise overspend we've got to on those schemes.
Yeah, so are you referring to the original targeted review of the 4 schemes, or the schemes that we've done in the subsequent review? Shall I do both? Okay. So in the initial targeted review, the schemes were Beckhill Car Park, Goole Leisure Centre, Throstle Nest, and Jocks Lodge. Okay. So in terms of we haven't got on the detail of the report the actual overspend. Although let me just have a look. Yeah, do you want me to give some examples?
I'd be quite interested if the information on the Jocks Lodge one, because that's a big.
The Jocks Lodge one came out quite well out of the 4, so that was the one.
Okay, give us the one that came out the worst then.
Well, they're very different, because even though I suppose Throstle Nest, probably relatively smaller in terms of value to the others, still had specific issues. So it's difficult, I suppose, to give you that analysis. What we can do is sort of share the details of the report with you, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it's important to recognise with that initial review, and I directed this with Benita, that I wanted those 4 schemes looked at because I knew there were issues there in terms of timelines of delivery, scope creep, increasing cost of schemes, decision making. So I thought it was important that I think these are well known to CLT and to the cabinet in terms of there have been issues around these. So what I wanted to extract is lessons learned for governance arrangements going forward, so we could correct any anomalies there that to stop a repeat of some of the issues we've seen. Jock's Lodge is an interesting one because obviously it's very high profile with the scheme live outside of Beverley at the moment. It's something that when it was originally mooted, the cost has gone up significantly since then, and that's very much linked to the scheme was originally worked up before the pandemic, and we've had really high inflation levels since the pandemic, and construction inflation particularly, alongside some of the works that has been done in actually looking at the feasibility of delivery of the scheme and some of the infrastructure around that area, and some of the permissions we've needed, some of the liaison we've had with energy companies around the infrastructure around the area has pushed costs up significantly for that scheme. Because there was a cap on how much the government was prepared to fund that scheme, and the funding from government is a really significant amount of money, it's just meant to enable that scheme to proceed. The council has had to look at bringing in more of its own funding to enable the scheme to go ahead, and that's been based on, as many capital schemes are, external borrowing, so that we can spread the cost of the scheme over many years into the future. But it was to look at the reasons why and how we can possibly put more controls around increases in cost to schemes, and more and importantly as well, us being earlier sighted on those issues going forward. So it's a good example of what we're trying to do through this audit, really, in terms of just to extract some lessons learned from that kind of those kinds of schemes where we know it's been difficult in terms of decision making because of issues popping up along the way.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. You just worry about reputational risk, really. I mean, if you look at a national level, look at HS2 and how completely wider the market is, and in terms of what it's trying to do, and also scope. I think it's not good for the council to get, if we got hauled over the coals by the press, etc., seeing that we can't actually run projects to budget. I know there's always things that come up along the way, but we've got to be better at it, really. And I suppose one of the points of an audit committee is to make sure that we are doing the best we can to do that.
Absolutely, and if I may come back, Chair, yeah, I mean, there's lots of really good examples throughout our capital programme of us being able to run projects to budget, and really successful delivery of capital schemes and key infrastructure across the East Riding. But it's important to look at where things don't go to plan, why they haven't gone to plan, and how we can make corrections to our governance process to help manage that going forward. So that's what it's intended to do. But what I will say about Jock's Lodge is that, yes, because of the difficult period during which the scheme was brought forward and worked up, as I say, first mooted pre-pandemic, looking to implement it, and we're faced with all those issues where all of a sudden we're faced with a much higher cost scheme than we thought it was going to be, due to all of those inflationary issues I've talked about. I think the reasons why we're in that positions were valid, but since that point, since it's been reworked up, the costs have been managed really well, and it's kept within budget. So I've no current concerns at all about that scheme. But it was just looking back at the period when we did have some concerns about feasibility going forward and how we managed that. Okay.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, Chair, could I just on that point, in terms of the subsequent piece of work we did in the 7 schemes, we gave it reasonable assurance, notwithstanding obviously the point I've made about the budget and the scope creep, but those, you know, those changes have all gone through a process, you know, and a managed process. I suppose we're looking at then the outturn to what was originally planned and just sort of encouraging the you know, any revised processes to really look quite closely at those as to why it changed, and are there any, again going back to Julian's point about the lessons learned.
Thank you, Benita. I think that's the sort of assurance that I was thinking about and looking for. It's not the fact that they have gone over budget, because that, you know, that happens. I think that what the Audit Committee are really seeking is an assurance that it's being monitored, that when this is happening, it's being properly monitored, processes are in place to ensure that it's noticed and it's accounted for properly, so there are no surprises. And I think I take it from those explanations that that is the case. Okay, thank you. And I think that Councillor Whitaker has.
Thank you. I mean, it's not about Jock's Lodge, because I, as a councillor in Minster and Woodmansey, do have quite a lot of thousands of emails with regards to Jock Lodge. And I will say to any councillor that wants to go, you can go to the site office and they are very helpful to give you information, including tarmac shortages, etc. So it's often worth going to speak to them, because actually on the ground. But I just wanted to ask some more questions about the other schemes, because although they're much less impact budget wise than Jock Lodge, they do have quite a significant impact. So can you tell me a little bit more about those?
So are you referring to the original report? Just bear with me. So we looked at, so when we actually did the report, we identified, so we looked at the schemes, but we identified the themes across the schemes. So, and then we said, well, these 2 schemes sort of fit into that theme. So we had compliance with corporate capital processes. So this is about at what point things get approved, and you know, and whether it's actually compliant with the council's contract procedure rules, and the point at which the budget was agreed in terms of the that sort of critical path timeline. A further theme was on the timeliness of business cases and specifications. So it's, do we go into a scheme with or without a costed business case, that sort of thing, options appraisal. And bearing in mind, going back to the original point, we knew there were some issues here around these areas. So this is why these schemes were selected. And then we wanted just to go into a bit more detail, just to try and pull out the learning and pull out relevant remediation. Then we had change management and budgetary control, which I think we've covered, and which, you know, we continue to sort of highlight. Internal bottlenecks and project schedules. So just around, if you consider the complex picture within the council and with partners and with external funders. So, you know, in a lot of cases, we've got funding coming from elsewhere, not necessarily from the council's sources. And, you know, the delays that, any delays around that then inevitably pushes the prices up. And then there was an issue about project resourcing and cost management, about relative responsibilities in terms of which schemes we project manage internally and which are project managed externally, and how we need to sort of move that forward in terms of lines of responsibility. So those are the themes, and not all of the schemes fell into every one of those themes. So does that help, and does that answer your question? Do you want me to say more?
It does. I was just wondering, within those themes, where are for the other 3, not for the obviously Jock's Lodge one, because I think you've covered that, but where are our biggest risks at the moment? And obviously we've then got the 7 that are coming up that you obviously going to be benchmarking against.
Yeah, so the 7 that we've recently looked at, we've just, some of those are completed. So the issues that we've raised there are just about the change from the original budget to the actual outturn, and so we want the council to look at the root cause analysis really through post-implementation review processes. On the others, the actions that have been identified are around the governance arrangements for the Capital Board, to look at existing processes and governance, to make sure that on the sort of pathway for capital schemes, for the management, for the approval and the management of the capital schemes, that there is strong governance and appraisal processes and that those are returned to. And business cases was another one in terms of making sure that they're of appropriate quality and that they are in compliance with, I suppose, a corporate model. The budgetary issues and scope creep, we'd identified as, you know, making sure that they went through all the proper programme boards. Now, in these schemes, they didn't always, that's why they're in our sample, but in the subsequent 7 schemes, they did. So we saw that pathway, even though some of the schemes overspent, we saw that governance pathway in the highlight reports. We have made some suggestions for improvements on that, of where maybe the budget doesn't agree to that particular highlight report, but we were satisfied with that. And then there was an issue around the internal teams, particularly internal teams, where there might just be some duplication and maybe double handling. And again, that was in particular with these schemes. We didn't see that as a particular highlighted issue in the 7 schemes that we looked at subsequently. Is that okay? Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from anyone? I'm looking at these. I think in terms of these 3 follow-ups, the first one, deputyships, we had lots of information and Officer Lisa Nixon coming to Audit Committee and keeping us updated. And I think looking at these other 2, I'd like to hear from members of the Audit Committee what they think about officers attending future audit committees. Certainly we've heard a lot there in the capital schemes targeted review that would suggest officer attendance at a future meeting in terms of giving us updates on progress made in view of the audit findings, and public health procurement tool, though perhaps we're a bit early with that, and it's going to be connected with other things that we're waiting to see what's set out as an action plan. So what do others think?
I think that the officer attendance is, yeah, it makes,
For the capital.
we're able to ask questions, we're able to kind of pull it forward, and I think that's the only way we can actually scrutinise this properly. And I do think that you know we've
for the capital one.
yeah, for the capital management, yeah. And I do think that Benita answers the questions really well when we're here, so it clarifies things well. So,
anyone else?
I just wonder on the, I mean, Councillor Whitty obviously knows much more about the health thing than I do. I mean, it does seem an area where things can get quite out of control in terms of what things cost. It might be interesting to get an officer back who can give us a bit more detail on that, just to see whether we are running over budget and how we're running over budget and what we can do to suggest that that doesn't happen. Even if it's a question of producing the correct budgets in the first place, rather than sort of why it's gone off budget. Follow me?
Is this in terms of a capital project, or do you mean in terms?
Well,
of
I just thought on the public
expenditure in that area, which
the public, yeah, public health, yeah.
I think the capital budget though would be the buildings, etc. So that would be assets, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, we have, there's a mixture of property and civil schemes, so it sort of, it covers a range of areas.
Okay, I think the consensus is that yes, the next attendance by officers should be on the capital schemes area, which is much further on, and the progress there, and there's something to actually talk about by the time the next audit. Sorry, I should can't decide that on my own. Is everybody in agreement with that? A show of hands that it is the, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anything else on the internal audit report? Right, the committee is just asked to note the assurance provided by the report. Thank you. And we'll move on next to number 6 on the agenda. It's the Treasury Management Activity Report, and it's Mark Button. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So this is an assurance report covering the Treasury Management activity from the 1st of April 25 to the 30th of September 25. First thing to note is that all the Treasury Management activity was undertaken in accordance with the Treasury policy. That's the sort of key message. If we move on to section 1.1, under background, it just sort of emphasises that the prime objective of our investment strategy is to maintain capital security while ensuring there is necessary liquidity to carry out the activities. Within those constraints, we aim to maximise returns. In terms of borrowing, we aim to minimise both the revenue cost of the debt and the potential volatility of these costs arising from interest rate changes. If we move on to section 2.2, the Operational Treasury Management Board met again every 2 months. It's chaired by the Director of Finance, and we consider issues of best practice, market conditions, and review restrictions in place over the policy for both the Council and the Pension Fund. If we move on to section 3.1, emphasising that we can't eliminate all of the investment risk, but we use a framework which is approved with the Treasury Management Policy, and on page 88 that summarises the framework we're working within. If we move further on the investment section onto the following page, 3.5 to 3.7 summarises that the main regulators in both the UK, Europe and the US conducted bank stress tests, and their conclusions are that the banks can consider can withstand a significant downturn in the economy in all of those regions, and they didn't have any serious concerns about the major banks. And 3.8 summarises that in terms of credit ratings and outlooks for the majority of the major banks, they've been pretty stable really, and there've been a few upgrades. That the sort of sector is fairly stable at the moment. 3.9 summarises the overall turnover of transactions, and page 89 to 91 shows them in some more detail. First of all, the total new loans or fixed term investments we've made is 175 million over the period. We made one new certificate of deposit investment. It's with a Japanese bank called Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation. The reason we've had to use a certificate of deposit is because some of the larger international banks, they only want to really consider direct relationships for doing a deposit with them if you've got huge amounts of money, like over 100 million deposit. Where considerably below that, we tend to do 5 million chunks. So one way to do it is to buy a certificate of deposit, and that's a tradable instrument that we could sell if we needed to for liquidity reasons. So the other main thing is that under a service level agreement, we are now managing the Hull and East Yorkshire Combined Authorities Treasury activities. And within the 174.3 million of investments that we had at the end of September, 39.5 million related to Hakers funds that were investing on their behalf. So that has now risen to 51 million, just as an update at the current point in time. And that is until they start dispersing some of the grant funding they've received. And I think they're putting agreements in place to do that. So we're considering our cash flow as well as Hakers cash flow, because that'll have an impact on what we're doing with investments in going forward. So the other thing to mention is during the period, we've still had quite a lot of high demand from local authorities for loans. And as a result of that, it's meant that even though bank rate is sort of a 4%, we've been able to return between 4.2 and 4.5%, depending on duration. More recently, I've just made a loan to a local authority for 8 months at 4.65%, and that's because it's gone into past April, and covering the year end is a sort of pinch period for local authority funding, and it means we can take advantage of that if we carefully manage our cash flows. So hopefully that'll prop up some of our general fund with some return from investments. On page 92, it covers a little summary of our investments by maturity, so you can see the profile of how they're maturing to make sure we've got sufficient liquidity when we need it. And then it also summarises investments by sector and region. On page 93, there's a summary against our Treasury policy limits and where we sat within them, just to give you an overview. And then if we move on to borrowing, at 4.5, it sort of explains that during the period we had sufficient liquidity and funds to withstand the internal borrowing that we've had, and we haven't needed to take any more external borrowing during the period. And at Appendix E, that is on page 94, that summarises both the general fund and HRA borrowing, and it also summarises the maturity profile of the borrowing, and again shows that we're not hitting a single period with an enormous maturity of borrowing that we have to refinance. So 4.6, that covers the movement in interest rates. So at the start of the period, I think the interest rate was 4.5%, and then with 2 rate cuts, that fell to 4%. I think there we were saying when the report was written, the expectation was around the end of the financial year, there might be another rate cut. Now financial markets have kind of revised what they're thinking, and they expect that it'll be much earlier than that, the first rate cut or next rate cut. They're expecting that it could be December, so maybe next month, maybe early next year. It all hinges on the budget, I think, and what happens in that to some extent. But inflation hasn't hit 4%, it was 3.8%. So if that is the peak, it's not been quite double the target. So that's quite good. At 4.9, we're talking about the prospects of the PWLB borrowing costs and for us, and they're driven by UK gilt yields. There's been various reasons which are highlighted later in that section on why gilt yields have been elevated recently and haven't moved in line with the rate cuts. And again, the budget will have a significant impact on what happens with those. But at the moment, we still do expect the elevated rates to start to come down slightly, and we have seen that in the last month or so. Some of those rates, the yields have dropped slightly. So we'll have to see where that goes in future. But obviously, the longer we can defer the borrowing because of cash balances, then the better if rates are projected to come down in future. So if I can take you back to Part D on page 83, and the recommendation that the assurance provided by the report is considered by yourselves. Thank you. Have you got any questions?
Councillor Whitaker.
Thank you, Mark. You actually answered quite a few of the questions with regards to the rate cuts, etc. So that's taken a few. But I do have one question, which is kind of mentioned in 3.7, which was that all of this stuff was set pre Trump's election. And I'm asking you to ask on world politics here, so please don't. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, but the effects of tariffs on worldwide, which is going to affect us. So, I mean, obviously our investments within North America and Canadian stuff, it's quite low, but actually these tariffs affecting worldwide, and what are we expecting going forward these are going to have effects on us? Because I know we're talking about rate cuts, but actually if that is affected worldwide, then that's going to change. And I'm expecting to answer a worldwide question, so I'm not expecting details.
So it is quite a wide question. I mean, at the moment, in terms of the US, I don't think the inflationary impact of their tariffs are sort of being seen yet. Quite what happens with that in the future, we've yet to see. I think in terms of redirecting trade and diverting trade from countries with cheaper labour costs, that could have a downward pressure on our inflation rate potentially, which could then allow rate cuts here. I think in terms of global trade, I think there hasn't been a huge slowdown at the moment. I think the UK's economy is still expected to be within the top 3 of the G7. So I think that there's been a few different forecasts. The IMF have done one, the OECD have done one, and I think they're expecting our growth rate to be above 1%, still 1.2, 1.3%. So that's sort of quite positive still. So I don't see a huge detrimental impact at the moment, but that's not to say that something else might happen around the corner that changes it significantly. And the one thing that has happened is where there's been some very significant results of the tariff, Donald Trump seems to step back at last minute and sometimes control it with enough pressure from certain sectors in the US. So I mean, the recent meeting with the Chinese president, effectively they reduced the tariff that imposed on China in return for less restrictions on the rare earth metals. And obviously that has a big impact on the economy worldwide. So that seems to be happening frequently. If that continues, then it may minimize some of the effects that potentially could have happened.
Thank you. That was one of my lesser questions, but you'd already answered the other one, so I thought I'd certainly answer it. And obviously the taco effect definitely does make a difference. So thank you for that.
So, okay, yeah. Are there any other questions? I've got just one very quick one. Thank you, Mark. A really sustained good rate of return again. Well done. Keep doing it. It was by that you talking about the certificate of deposit being a tradable instrument. It never really occurred to me that that we might have tradable instruments, and have we got any others?
Not at the moment, no. However, depending on market conditions, one tradable instrument we might use is a UK Treasury bill. So I think at the moment, the sort of month rate in the Treasury bills is relatively competitive compared to maybe an overnight rate from a money market fund. It just kind of depends on market demand as to where those levels go. And obviously that's UK debt if we were to do that. There are other things we have bought in the past that we haven't done recently is sort of more non-bank commercial sort of floating rate notes or alternatively bonds. But we haven't had need to do that because there's been sufficient instruments elsewhere. Obviously, we don't buy those instruments to trade. We buy them with the intention of holding them to maturity. So we've got a sort of fixed return essentially. Unless it's a variable rate instrument. It would only be if either for some reason there's an unforeseen liquidity issue, but we tend to hold a sort of level of overnight cash that allows us to access cash when we need it anyway. The other thing is if there was a significant deterioration in an institution's credit rating from an unforeseen event, and if that happened, then we may make the decision to liquidate that. The only problem with that is if that's happened and there's still a high likelihood of it being repaid and honoured, we would lose a lot of principal by selling it early. So there's a few considerations surrounding that, but we would normally just hold to maturity and we wouldn't actually look to trade.
Okay, thank you. Right, if there are no other questions for Mark, I think we are asked to note the contents of the report, duly noted. And now I'm conscious that we've got 2 more to go, and I think the risk register might take some time for discussion. So would anybody like a comfort break? Yeah, 5-10 minutes? Right, welcome back, everyone. And let's move on to item number 7, the fraud investigation update from Andy Hardy, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The report outlines the performance of the fraud investigation team for the first 6 months of the financial year. Hopefully you're familiar with the format of the report. There's a couple of areas that I just draw your attention to. The first being at section 2.1, the table there that's on page 97. So excuse me because I'm full of cold. There's some differences in the figures on referrals and investigations between 24-25 and the current year. And just to explain what those, or we believe those to be. Council tax support, the differences between the referrals there are around the work that we're able to do on proactive work. So this is when we're actually going out and doing internal data matching or looking at specific areas. That might be geographical areas or particular types of claims. Because we're doing more and more work with the Department for Work and Pensions, joint working, and those cases are progressing to sanction, so either administrative penalties or prosecutions, they take up a lot more of our time. So we're unable to then take on proactive work that would increase that number of referrals. There was also the general election in that year, and that explains both the rise in council tax support and single person discount, where people were registering to vote. So we were able to match electoral registration data, as we do every month, with our council tax database, and this produced a very high level of referrals, particularly on single person discount. On right to buys, there was a change in government policy in November last year that reduced the actual discount that could be, or the value of the discount that could be applied to a right to buy application. So it dropped dramatically. I think it was from about 124,000 to 16,000 in this area. So there was a flood of applications came in pre-November for people who wanted to, so they could maximise their discount that they could receive. And that's why the number of referrals was 70 last year, and it's 29 this year. Just having a look, I think that more or less explains that. Just to look at section 2.2, which is the only other section that I would refer to. As I explained earlier, we're finding that we're doing more and more work with the Department for Work and Pensions. So somebody may receive in universal credit or a disability related benefit or pension credit, but they're also receiving council tax support at the same time. So it makes sense that we investigate jointly on those cases. And these, because of the levels that are involved, particularly with the DWP side of the investigations, they are progressing to court. So we've had 2 cases in the last 6 months that have gone to court, and they're detailed there. They were both people who were claiming in the Beverley area. One was for an overpayment that amounted to £10,000 and another for £33,000. There's nothing else that I would draw your attention to as such. I'd just ask that you consider the report, and I'd invite any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Wood.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. One that's just popped up with regards to right to buy. So I'm just looking through. Of those that were investigated and upheld, can I ask what were false tenancies? Do we know the figure of that? What?
Yeah, there weren't any false tenancies.
There was no false
They were
tenancies.
as we understood it, they were all people who had made an application to for a right to buy application, and then after we'd got involved, we do a number of verification checks, but we also contact them and let them know that we're looking at the application. And I think it was 12 of those tenants then withdrew their applications, or they were denied because there was something that we discovered that prevented them from buying the property at that time. This could be something as simple as a county court judgment that was outstanding, or it could be that they have an overpayment, with a large overpayment with the authority.
Right, okay. Thank you, that's all for the moment, actually, but yeah.
And I've just got a very quick one. Could you tell us a bit more about this NFI exercise? Is that you receiving data of under various categories and you match it, your team match it? Yeah. No, it's matched. Or explain, please.
Yeah, the National Fraud Initiative. The National Fraud Initiative takes place every 2 years, and it's in October every 2 years. And there are a number of data sets that we have to upload to the National Fraud Initiative web portal. So it's encrypted data that's updated, and that can be payroll, pensions, council tax support, creditors. I think there's about 13 or 14 data sets we upload. The Public Sector Fraud Authority then take that information from ourselves and around 1,200 other organisations. These organisations might be local authorities or police authorities, fire brigade, National Health Service, pensions providers, and they data match it. And then what they do is they return a number of what we call matches. Now, some are matches within the authority, so it will match our data, for instance, with HMRC data, and we will will look at that. So it might be that we've got Andy Hardy claiming council tax support, saying he's a lone parent living at 12 the High Street, whereas HMRC have got Melanie Hardy registered at that address for a pay-as-you-earn. So then we will look at why that is. We then look at matches that are external to the authority. So this might be Andy Hardy has a tenancy at 12 the High Street. It's a local authority tenancy, but it's also got one at 12 the High Street in Grimsby. So why is that? And then we have to look at that side of it as well. So we look at those matches over the 2-year period, and it's not that we just get one set of data at the beginning. We usually get, say we upload it October, we usually get the matches end of December. But then continually throughout that 2-year period, they refresh the data as they get it. So they'll refresh it with HMRC data or DWP deceased data, and send us additional matches. So it's a continuous process. There's a bit of a large influx of work at the beginning, but then it's a continuous stream after that.
Okay, thank you. I understand now. Are there any other? Councillor Redshaw and then Councillor Hopson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in respect of item 2.5, the right to buy applications, the report indicates you've received 34 applications, 34 investigations completed. As a result of those, 12 tenants either withdrew their applications or had them refused. What's the nature of the kind of potential fraud, or what is it you're looking at that would lead to refusals?
Some of it could be, as the councillor referred to earlier, where it could be that the tenant isn't actually living there any longer, that they've actually left the property. We've had that in the past. It could be around the funding aspect of it. So it could be that somebody's the funding that they're receiving is from a friend or an associate or an external family member, and we actually write to them to find out where the funding's coming from. to make sure that there isn't any money laundering, for instance, that's happening. So it could be those reasons why.
Andy, thanks for that. To be fair, I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team on behalf of the council taxpayers of the county. I think people think, oh, it's like the council being frauded or the council spending money or whatever else. It's not. It's the council taxpayers. So, you know, there is no effectively council money or government money. It's taxpayers' money. So, yeah, this is, you know, will be widely, you know, gratefully received that, you know, that such amount of money is sort of prevented from being stolen effectively. And yeah, hopefully that figure will become nil at some point. I'm only joking. That's never going to happen. But yeah, yeah, thank you for that. That's all I wanted to say. Cheers.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Andy before we move on? Okay, the Audit Committee will note the assurance provided by the fraud investigation update, and we'll move on to item 8, the strategic risk register review for Q1, and that will be Mike Salter.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The report which I bring through to the committee today is the exception report as of the end of June 25. The exception report is a lighter touch report, so it just reflects those risks that have either been added or removed from the register, or those that have increased or decreased in score, and the complement of red rated risks. On page 104 of the pack, it actually covers all of the risks ranked from highest to lowest risk. So, you know, the report contains all risks as a one-pager. One risk has increased on the report today, which is the SRO1 finance risk. One risk has been added to the report, which is SRO3, which relates to changes in the ICB, which I will cover in more detail just after I've covered this particular summary. The report also covers that two previous legal and democratic risks, SRO7 and SRO8, have now been merged into one risk, SRO8. We haven't lost any detail within each of those risks. It's just simply that we've merged them together. One was particularly static in that nature, and we like the risk report to be quite dynamic in that regard. So that merger has taken place. So the three red risks that now form part of the report are, as I said earlier, the SRO1 finance risk, the new SRO3 risk, which relates to the ICB, and the continuation of the legal frameworks risk, which is SRO8. Just to convey that at this juncture, this report covers to the end of June. I just taking the latest report, the more updated report to overview management scrutiny next month, and then with Cabinet with the same report, and that report will come through to yourselves in January. So the much wider report and the more updated position will be taken to those committees. Unfortunately, at this stage, it's not got the full approval through the officer committees yet. So as and when it has done, those will be finalised for those key milestones in December committees. On that basis, just to reassure, or perhaps at least cover, we have talked about the CQC report today in terms of the adult social care. And whilst today's report doesn't reflect an increase, that is obviously more than likely going to increase on the next report. We, similar to, as my colleague Benita talked about earlier, it's just perhaps a little bit too early to look into that particular area at the moment, because we're developing, the service themselves are developing the improvement action plan, and it will be the intention to fully rework the SRO4 risk in conjunction with that piece of work. So just at this point, I thought I would just cover in a little bit more detail around SRO3, the newly added risk to the report, just to give you some context. This is in relation to national reform of the NHS service, which includes the decommissioning of NHS England. And the need for the NHS is to focus on more frontline care rather than back office approach. Obviously local health is delivered through the integrated care boards, of which there's around 40, I think it's 42. And those also, as part of the rationalisation, have also been earmarked to save in the approximate region of 50% of their costs and staffing levels. So this is, as I said, it's all to do with the national reform to deliver more frontline healthcare, but at the same time reducing cost. As you can appreciate, we've built strong partnerships with the ICBs. Indeed, we were due to re-sign Section 75 agreement, which is a memorandum of understanding as to how we work with the ICBs. And part of that work includes how we divide the cost element of the care packages. And obviously, due to the fact of the streamlining of the NHS services, the need to bring this onto the risk report is quite prevalent because of there's going to be a huge amount of staff reduction within the NHS, and how will we interface with the NHS going forward? So this was penned on the back of that. Obviously, things have taken shape since that point. We have tried to get some roundtable discussions with the ICBs about agreeing a joint working going forward. But there's a stronger wish to include all the other local councils that also form part of the ICB. So it will be a collective nature, and that meeting is due to take place next month. And therefore, as this risk moves forward, we will be able to take better advice on that. One key early indication was that there's an aftercare agreement, which is known as the Section 117 aftercare agreement, which particularly relates to mental health cases. And initial indications were that the ICBs had reneged on the original cost premise, which was a 50-50 split of those care packages. And unlike standard care packages, Section 117 aftercare relating to the mental health are actually free to service user provision in terms of cost base. So that's a direct cost to ourselves from that particular basis as to the ICB reneging on that. As I said, we are in discussions with the ICB. It's going to take shape as we move along that path, but it's still unknown to us at the moment, and therefore that risk has been included on the register. Then just to cover the other red risks, if I may, and then I'll invite questions. The finance risk has elevated in score on this particular report. That was on the back of a £2.5 million overspend at the end of the very first quarter of the financial year, which was quite a worrying position to be in. And therefore, we increased the score accordingly. The costs, as you will see from the KRI table within the pack, you can see that the costs have increased in particularly around the adults and children's elements of the council, and that's generally due to increased demand, the complexity and the cost increase within each of those areas. Alongside this, again, a compounding pressure has been the likely outcome of the Fair Funding 2 review is unlikely to be in favour of our current financial position, and that's going to put a further squeeze on the council finances. So, it's quite a pressured environment around the finances still at this juncture. What we've taken the decision to do, as you may well be aware, is to operate a shadow operational leadership team on a weekly basis, separate to SLT, and give an SLT the direct focus of cost saving elements for in-year cost savings, and therefore for future years. And again, within the business change element, so this is the process type business change elements, we're looking at redesigning what that particularly looks like and the refocus of those particular priority areas with greater focus to be able to deliver greater savings. That particular work is has been happening now for a couple of months around the OLT and SLT shadow arrangements, and it's likely that that will reap rewards, and it would be interesting to see what that next report brings. And as I said, I'll be bringing that report to OMC next month and Cabinet within December also, and to yourselves in January. And then just finally, just covering the last red risk, which is around data protection. The position's unchanged from previous presentations that I've made to yourselves. That again, it's an arena of increasing demand. As council services are accessed more readily and more often, it creates further demand on the services to get through the subject access requests and freedom of information requests. So the trajectory of the demand profile for that particular work increases as time moves on, and it's just about us being able to pinpoint those particular areas that are in need of help along that journey, and legal and democratic services do that quite intuitively and work alongside services to jump onto either complex subject access requests or indeed services that have a high number to get them over the over the hill in terms of the large proportion that they have. So nothing's particularly changed in that area. The KRIs relating to that are very much the same, but it's still a concern area, and therefore it's still a red risk and one that we'll keep our eye on. And at that point, I will hand over to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bibb.
Thank you, Chair. My question's regarding risk SRO1, the failure to contain spending within budget and deliver a sustainable financial plan. It may have been for Julian, but I see he's had to leave, unfortunately. The government are considering cutting funding for rural authorities, I believe, and they're saying that councils should have a base tax income of £2,000 per Band property. And I believe in the East Riding, this is near £1,800. So in effect, we're getting punished for not always raising council tax to the maximum. This could potentially lead to us losing between 11 and 15 million a year in funding. Now, I know that our leadership team are fighting against this. They've been supported by the MP, the Mayor, LGA, etc. But was this potential shortfall in funding considered and taken into account when this report was made? And what mitigations are being considered if we do lose 11 or up to 15 million? I mean, it sounds an incredible number, which, you know, could potentially have a major impact on frontline services.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Bibb. Obviously, the report does cover the fact that we're aware that fair funding review is likely to give us a less than reasonable settlement in our eyes. There are lobbies towards government to obviously look into that. The exact figures that you quoted are, apologies, I'm not cited on those particular figures that yourself are, and indeed Julian may well have been able to cover that. But we're currently within the financial planning process at the moment, so that all of those considerations, including that element, whilst it's a huge animal in itself in terms of the vast amount of money that it relates to, it is being considered in the financial planning cycle, and members will be cited on the financial planning process as we go through, and therefore you'll have full context of that. But not to underestimate the amount of challenge that does create us. We're already facing compounding pressures from adult social care and children's, which are reflected in the month 2 position, which this report covers from finances. I am encouraged. Personally, I'm encouraged, and I can't quantify that and I can't qualify that entirely, but I'm assured by the level of work being taken through the senior leadership team with giving that direct focus on the in-year savings to deliver that for us now. And I'm also assured and reassured by the nature of the business change risk that's undergoing a rebooting of that particular activity. And I would like to think that with the financial planning process and the focus of SLT and the business change rebooting, that will come to a particular perhaps difficult position where we've had to consider our approach in terms of whether that be an operating model or whether that be particular consideration for certain council services, that it will be an agreed position throughout us all that it's a position that we can take forward and make it viable in terms of balancing the budget for next year. And although that might not be the exact answer that you need right now, I know that we're on the path to make sure that there'll be full member sight of that along the path, and that it'll be an agreed position of how we move forward to sustain a balanced budget going forward.
If I could have a wiggle on that, Chair, I think one of the very positive things that came out of this report was the savings, as you've already alluded to. I believe the target was 10.5 million, and the actual amount of savings was 14 million, which is an incredible effort to exceed quite a difficult target. And I remember in the budget in full council, members of the opposition were saying that these targets were pie in the sky and unachievable. So well done on actually achieving them and, in fact, exceeding them.
Thank you. I'll certainly reflect that back and provide that back to the relevant officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Redshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if you look at SRO1 as regards the budgetary pressures or the income issues, combined with SRO3, which is the increased cost to the council, particularly on adult social care and children's. I mean, you're looking at schools where I think the report indicates costs are going up, or likely to go up exponentially in the coming year. But clearly, there's a lot of scrutiny following the CQC report on adult social care. But this again brings up a lot of worrying issues that following the reduced budget of the Integrated Care Board. We're looking at potentially placement breakdowns, increased hospital admissions, reputational damage to the council, and a lot of financial strain on the council on the back of it. It's like a perfect storm coming our way that we're really, we're trying to manage as best we can. Now, on SRO3, there was mention that KRIs are being drafted. So do I have a timing or any indication of the nature of those KRIs? Because clearly, as things stand, we need to be on top of this and get a workable picture in front of us as soon as possible. Yes, no, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I have sight of those KRIs. Obviously, I'm not in a position to share those as yet, but it's around delving into the detail of complex cases. What is interesting, the particular strain at the moment is around the Section 117 aftercare, which is relating to the mental health, and that's because as a council we have to pick up the tab in terms of it being free to users, unlike standard care packages. We bear the cost of that. So we're particularly looking at that particular area in terms of complex cases and how that flushes through. And evidentially, what we intend to do is to go back to the ICB with this leveraging arrangements that we're going to have with the other local councils that form part of the ICB to say, here's the analysis of the breakdown. Now, I'm not able to share fully at this stage, but it's not to say that the door's completely closed on the ICB. So therefore, we are still in discussions with them, and it'd be wrong for me to paint a picture of a total blackout completely. But it is very transient, and we will need to just stay close to it. So yes, the KRI work, I think it's something like 7 or 8 KRIs fleshed out by the service, but it's all to do with understanding those particular cases and being able to evidentially submit that back to the ICB and say, look, this is what we used to do before, this is what we're doing now, where do we broker a middle ground? And obviously, as you say, there's potential reputational damage to us, but there's also reputational damage towards the ICB as well, of course, and therefore back to central government. So it's it's a revolving door scenario in terms of nobody's really let off the hook in terms of their responsibilities under the Care Act 2014, and therefore people are engaged in conversation, and it's not devoid. We have built up a very strong relationship with the ICB, with those particular individuals, key people, and we would like to think that those same key people are going to be around the table, subject to those cuts within the NHS service, that we can still have those conversations with the same people that we sat around the table with for the vast many years prior. and therefore we built up that relationship and can talk honestly about the particular squeeze on each organisation, not just ours, but also the ICB, and therefore come to a mutual understanding, which is a best case scenario to combat the perfect storm. Yeah, thank you for that. At the end of the day, we need a national solution, and that's, you know, this council's suffered at the hands of numerous governments over the years, and it's really not getting any better. It's getting quite a lot worse under the current government, and yeah, we can only do what we can do at the moment. And but thank you for the report.
Thank you, Councillor Whitaker.
Thank you, Chair. SRO1 is obviously inextricably linked with everything, but I think particularly with the new one of SR03, I think is there. Obviously, SRO1 is a score that's increased. What specific savings or mitigations are at risk of non-delivery this year?
Honestly, I've not seen anything that's come out of that negatively at this stage in terms of non-delivery of particular service areas. We are obviously considering very carefully the capital programme in the mix with this, and that does lead to consideration given to how much we use of our own money towards capital schemes. Indeed, you know, there are authorities out there that don't use any of their own money towards capital schemes, and therefore that's a consideration for us. But what tends to happen in that regard is we don't want to damage the future. We don't want to damage 10 years time or 15 years time or 20 years time, or indeed the longer future. We want to keep the prosperity of the area, so we want to keep doing everything that we're doing in a positive way. But ultimately, as part of the financial planning process, something will have to give in order to deliver that balanced budget. So I would say I haven't seen a particularly negative outcome from the finance position at this stage. How we address that and how we actually mitigate that in the future to make sure that any damage is limited to as much as possible, but in full agreement with the relevant parties as part of that planning process, the budgeting process, is really the prime consideration.
And they will be brought back to this committee?
Well, indeed, the financial planning process will be quite distinct from the risk report in terms of that, but the risk report will be reflective of the current financial position on the next report at the juncture of the end of September, of course. But the financial planning process will not be formed part of that because it wasn't completed by the end of September, and therefore it will be the report, subsequent report to that, which I can bring back that detail.
Councillor Bird, and then Councillor Redshaw, please.
Thank you for allowing me another question, Chair. This one relates to SR08. It's about freedom of information requests. I noticed that it's a red rating because the number completed within 20 days is 71%. But that's hard to quantify, because if it's 71% of 3, then it's not good. But if it's 71% of 100, then I think that's actually quite decent. So I would like to know the numbers around that. And from my experience, a lot of these freedom of information requests aren't done for positive reasons. I'd go so far as to say they're a malicious waste of officer time. So what can we do to prevent people constantly submitting FOIs which aren't really doing anyone any good at all? And then when they're getting the answers, they're not accepting them and coming back with more. I just feel like it's very unfair on the officers to be subjected to this. And going back to something that Councillor Whitaker said previously, is this something we could use AI for? You know, I fully understand that we need to be transparent on things, but there always also has to be a degree of reasonableness involved.
No, thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question. I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you we get, I mean, hundreds, if not, I think it's probably thousands over the course of a year, FOI requests. So to answer your number in broad terms about your question in broad terms about the number we get, we're talking about dozens a week. One thing we can do, we are required to answer them, because we can't pick and choose which ones we choose to answer because it's under the kind of statutory requirement law of the land. One thing we can do is we can proactively publish information. So there are some requests that we get on a repetitive basis every year. And one of the things we've tried to do is publish information on our website so that officers don't have to start from scratch when they're answering those questions, and we can actually just point people to a link in the website. And it's called the publication scheme, I think, in the FOI legislation. That's quite an important answer to that. You are right about the nature of FOI requests. A lot of them come from round robin kind of journalists, if you like, and they're sent to all councils, etc. But on the other hand, transparency is important, isn't it? Which you acknowledge, because it's kind of the way in which things come to light sometimes, in organisations across the country. The other thing we can do is where responding to an FOI request takes many, many hours, because information is in disparate places, we can claim exemptions if it's unreasonable. Your word unreasonable is a good one. So I think many FOI requests come in. They do take up a lot of officer time. We try and publish the information proactively so that we can point people to that. But you are right. It's a big task for the council.
Do you find that there's certain people who submit multiple FOIs? Is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, you do get individuals who make a lot of FOI requests. Actually, that's not a reason for not answering them. But you're right. Obviously, some people don't make any FOI requests, and other people make a lot. So that's a statement of fact.
Thank you, Chair. There were a couple of things in the report that I was a little bit disappointed about in terms of SRO2 and SRO6, in that the last data entries for those on the KPIs were back in March, which is nothing's really. And I think one of the reports was saying that the last quarter data show marked improvement, whereas in fact the last data we have goes back, I think, to either March or possibly June. But that aside, looking at SRO2 and the biodiversity report, I had a look at the State of Yorkshire Nature report, which indicates we kind of had a pivotal moment and presented with a real opportunity to realise the UK target of securing 30% of land for wildlife by 2030. When at present only, I think, 15% of land across Yorkshire is protected, and in fact, much of that is in poor condition as well. So, given our local nature recovery strategy is only set for approval sometime early next year, how confident can we be that we will get anywhere close to meeting the 2030 target that's mentioned in the report?
Thank you for the question. Just to go into the data set, those data sets are from an England measure, so we have to take those at the. And unfortunately, some of the colleagues in the room may have greater insight into the public health measures. So some of the public health measures are three years. So that's just, we're bound by that. In terms of the local nature recovery strategy, we had that independently verified by a consultant, has been very strong. It was very highly commended by an independent external consultant. So whilst the picture for the UK generally, Yorkshire, for instance, as you've already outlined, may be poor, our approach to it has been commended at this stage, and we're going to have to just let that flush through in terms of actions. I asked a similar question around the percentages in terms of the management of those sites of special interest, the SSIs, because obviously anything red to me is an immediate right. I want to know more about that, and just by the nature of that local nature recovery strategy, we're going to see traction on those numbers. but it might be a slow burn approach. But of course, we've had the local plan, which is distinctly separate to this, but dovetails into this quite nicely around that, so that the local plan will help us deliver those spaces as well as part of that overarching agreement as well.
Okay,
Okay,
Councillor
thank you.
Whittaker.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions with regards to pages 124 to 126, so it's CQC send stuff. First of all, on page 126, in October 2021, a joint inspection of Ofsted and the CQC was undertaken assessing the council's effectiveness in implementing special educational needs reforms, and 4 weaknesses were identified. Can I ask, that was 4 years ago, what have we done since then to improve those weaknesses?
Yes, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I don't have that specific information with me in terms of what has been done. Obviously, I know that an awful lot of work has been done, but specific actions around improvement plans have been taken place, but I'm not fully cited on that in terms of what's on the report today in terms of the detail behind that. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have any of that detail, but that's something that I could bring back on a subsequent meeting. But
There's a follow-up question, so I'll ask the follow-up question and work that out. So do you know, and you may not, so this may need to be brought back, are we still under a Department of Education deficit management plan? We are. And what are the consequences for our trajectory if we don't meet that plan?
I can't give you the answer to that because I don't know, but we can come back with the information. I don't know much about the deficit plan or the consequences. I know the council's working with the DfE to reduce the deficit, but I'm sorry, I'm a bit vague on the information. I can only say we can bring it back to you.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot to bring back. That's
yeah.
Yeah, can I suggest this will be on this same risk will be there at our next meeting and updated perhaps. So could we just take a note that Councillor Whittaker's question and can be postponed to our next meeting? Councillor Reddy.
Just while we're on the subject, it indicates that the send and inclusion strategy is in the process of production and sign off. And bearing in mind that a send inspection is kind of imminent, do we have a timing as to when that strategy is likely to be finally signed off and will be made available?
Again, that's something that I'll have to bring back to the next committee, or I can provide a briefing note prior if you so wish.
Can we discuss that perhaps later about whether a briefing note's necessary or whether we just leave it? We can, but I don't think we need to discuss it in committee. Is that okay? Yeah. Right. Are there any more questions? I have, and bear with my meandering train of thought, but it has a beginning and an end that result in the questions. So just listening to what Councillor Bibb said about the consequences of the fair funding review and also savings. Can we just confirm, as I understand it, the fair funding review is estimating 19.5 million over the 3 years, perhaps as a loss to us in revenue, and it'll be transitional. So 26/7 will have 6.5 million, and Sarah's going to have to follow me as I go here because I think you'll need to answer some questions, Sarah. So okay, so we've got that. And we've got the fact that we created the risk and transformation reserve for and that amount that we had, which was initially targeted at 10, I think, 10 million. So my first question is, are these both reflected in this risk assessment? Both of these aspects, and I think the answer to that is yes. But I just like confirmation, right? And then I move on. So we have got a reflection of savings and sort of prudency in creating the reserve and in anticipation of less than we expect in the fair value settlement. So confirmation of that. So the next question is, has the risk weighting of SRO1 increased to September? Is it higher in September? Has risk weighting increased? And the third question is being more specific on those numbers. And I'm thinking here about the results of the CQC. Although, to be fair, that wouldn't be September, the end of September, but I'd still like to know if the risk has increased at the end of September. But now, excuse me, coming on to CQC, I think my understanding here is that there was a deficit of 6.2 million in adult social care reflected in this risk register to June. And that 6.2 million has been allocated to adult social care from the Risk and Transformation Reserve. And this is where Sarah's going to need to think about answering that. So is that correct, that understanding? And if so, that means that that reserve is significantly decreased. And does that 6.2 that has already been allocated include the 1 million allocated by Cabinet to kick off the improvements? And what's the anticipated further cost of that? I'm trying to think about what's going to be left in Risk and Transformation Reserve.
Thank you for the question. In answer to your first question, was it a consideration around the 6.2 million? Yes, it is within this report. The other easier question to answer around the CQC, yes, that is reflected in the next risk report, which is going to, as I said, going to overview scrutiny. I think it's the 4th of December and then Cabinet soon after. So in regard to the finance score, which is, I believe, is the last question, but with an undertone of this here, this money here, this money here, and this money, where's it all coming from? I'm unable to give you all of the answers as to where all the money's coming from and what's been factored and what hasn't. But what I can say is, at this juncture, whilst I cannot share the latest report from September because it's not gone through the proper approval process, as I mentioned earlier, and indeed, as acknowledged by, I believe it was Councillor Redshaw earlier, maybe a mistake, might be Councillor Bibb, who acknowledged or thanked the officers for the work to produce those savings of 12.5 where people thought it would be impossible to achieve. The direct focus of SLT over certainly the last number of weeks, if not, I think it's been around 2 months, but please don't quote me on the exact timings of that. The work that they've undertaken in order to reduce in-year savings, I am fairly confident at this juncture that will reap the rewards necessary. So in answer to your question as to will SRO1 increase on the next risk report, I cannot say for definite because it's not gone through the approval process, but I can give you, a glimmer of hope that the work that's been undertaken to address the situation from that month 2 position has been quite remarked and stark and strong enough to combat the position that we're in. However, we're not out of the woods yet. The underlying cost base has increased inevitably, and it's a new norm of cost base, and we do need to navigate that financial planning process to get to an agreed position where we can create a balanced budget, which is what we want for our residents for the next coming year. As regards the intricacies of moving money, as you can appreciate, the gentleman that could answer that particular question had to leave earlier, and I'm unable to delve into any more detail than what's really in the risk report at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Whitaker.
Sorry, it's just on the back of everything that's just been said. I have recently been involved through literature that I've been producing for my daytime job with the campaign for plain English, the plain language group. All of this it's difficult to understand when you don't read it all the time. Are we producing versions of this that's accessible for the public in plain English? Because there is a need for transparency over all of this.
Thank you for the question. It's really, I'd be encouraged to work with you to understand what particular areas you know, you would like in, you know, a different format.
I think the risk register more than anything else, just so that somebody who's not financially has any financial understanding doesn't do the training that we do. I've got to be honest, when I look at the report, I put quite a lot of stuff through to translate because I'm not in the financial sector, I'm in the NHS. So actually making it accessible to the general public, I think, is important.
No, thank you for the feedback. I can obviously take that feedback back. If it was particularly around SRO1, just taking your feedback as being, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are those all the questions? I think Mike has probably had enough questions for today on the risk register anyway. Thank you, Mike. Okay. I think that we are asked just to note the updates to the register as an audit committee on this occasion, so we can take that as note. And that brings us to the end of our agenda, apart from any other items. Does anyone have anything? Then I only have one. And I just wanted to finish by saying to everyone that this is Darren Stevens, our Executive Director of Corporate Resources, last Audit Committee meeting. And on behalf of the Audit Committee, to thank him for his service. Can we?